Redesigning a modern classic has to be one of the most difficult, thankless tasks out there, but time waits for no man, and that's exactly what Jaguar has had to do with this, the brand new F-Type. This thing has been an automotive icon since it was released in 2013, but fast forward 7 years and it's time to make changes, and that's exactly what they've done. They've stuck to the old silhouette, but added some new wheels wrapped in wider tyres. The back end is largely the same, apart from some new rear light clusters and a new bumper, and this V8R version gets the familiar quad exhausts. Probably the most controversial change is at the front. It's got this massively wide grille, huge air intakes, and these squinty little J-blade headlights. Do I like it? Still not sure, I'm on the fence, but at least it brings it into line with Jaguar's other models like the XF and the XE. Plus, it's hard to get hung up on the front when the rest of the car is just so beautiful. And that back end is just gorgeous. It looks like an absolute spaceship, doesn't it? Plus, speaking of exhaust pipes, a lot of you watched my preview video and accused me, little old me, the most honest man in motoring journalism, of faking the exhaust noise. I'm not having that. Cameraman, come here please. Watch this, I'm gonna start it up in real time, yeah? So you know exactly what it sounds like. 5 litre, supercharged V8, no edits. Watch this. You ready? Yeah? Never accuse me of lying again. So for 2020, the F-Type is powered by a couple of different engines. One is a 2 litre 4-cylinder. That's not this one. And then there are a couple of V8s. This is the big dog, the V8R. 5 litre engine, supercharged, noise, fury. You know the recipe. And you can probably guess the result as well. 0 to 60 in 3.5 seconds and 186 miles an hour flat out. And it's no surprise it's that quick because it makes 575 horsepower and 700 Newton meters of torque. That's up from 550 and 680 on the previous car. The gearbox in the F-Type has always been good, but now it uses the same calibration as the SV Project 8, so it's faster and more aggressive. Honestly, there's a lot to love about the entire powertrain in this car, but the gearbox is the star of the show in this thing. It's so involving. I've driven dual clutch gearboxes and even manual transmissions that aren't as much fun as this. You fire a pistol and you get a recoil, a vibration through the machine, and in this, it's exactly the same every time you change. Bang! Another huge feather in the F-Type's cap is the noise. We live in a world now where most cars are subject to noise restrictions and particulate filters that ruin the sound of a car, but the F-Type still sounds utterly joyous. I've always said that the noise has always been the F-Type's biggest party trick. Bangs when you upshift, crackles when you lift off. It's such a theatrical engine and it sounds glorious. It sounds like a dinosaur gargling a bag full of hand grenades. This might be maybe the best sounding car out there, certainly for the money. For any of you that might be worried about whether this thing might be a little bit too obnoxious, don't worry about it. They've actually toned it down a little bit in comparison to the previous F-Type. It doesn't pop and bang quite as aggressively, particularly when you're rolling around, not applying too much throttle. Let's just say that the previous version was a little bit prone to setting off car alarms every single place it went, but the new one, you can drive it without looking like a complete thug. Now, as always, the car actually comes with a button to make the exhaust quieter. You can actually press it when you don't want to scare people or annoy your neighbors. And they've also installed a quiet start mode. So when you hold the exhaust button down as you start the car, in theory, it will start the car without it being too loud, which is great if you want to set off early in the morning without waking up your neighbors. Or at least that's the theory. The reality is that the quiet start mode doesn't do an awful lot. Your choice is either loud or loud. If you really want to turn heads, then you're gonna have to spend a little bit of money. This standard car starts at £97,000, but obviously this isn't the standard car. This has a few upgrades, starting with this gorgeous Sorrento paint, £4,500. Fixed panoramic sunroof, £1,300. The black pack, which gets rid of the chrome around the window surround, the vents, the leaper on the rear, and around the grille at the front, a pretty reasonable 265 quid. All in all, this car will retail for £110,000. They think it's worth every penny, clearly. Inside, the new F-Type features the same basic layout as before, but now has nicer materials, some really good sports seats on the R version, and some great new technology. The new tech is a definite highlight. I'm not saying it's cutting edge, but it's nice to see that they've made some progress. One of the things I really like is this new digital instrument display, which shows you a big, nice, clear rev counter, as well as your speed, and a nice little map that shows you where you're going. You also get a much better infotainment screen. It's much bigger than before and supports Android Auto, Apple CarPlay, and it has Spotify baked right in. You don't even have to pair your phone. You can listen to streaming music on the go. Works brilliantly too. The only problem is we're being spoiled right now. There are quite a few car manufacturers including all this stuff and more, like voice assistants and gesture control, and part of you starts to expect that level of technology, especially if you're really into your tech. But the F-Type isn't all about tech. It's less focused on the distractions that take place inside the cabin and far more focused on keeping the driver entertained where it matters, on the road. What the F-Type does best is it drives superbly. Don't be fooled by the looks. This is not a track car. This is more of a GT car that's comfortable for cruising around in and looking good in, but that also rewards you for driving a bit like a hooligan whenever the mood takes you. It behaves a lot like the previous car, but this new version has an updated chassis and updated dampers. Without boring you with the details, what it all boils down to is that the suspension is now softer at the front and stiffer at the rear. Ultimately, what that means is that you get better control of the contact patch at the rear. The tires are now 10mm wider, but the new suspension setup gives you a more predictable, more progressive oversteer when you're at the limit. The suspension is a little bit on the soft side. There's a little bit of body roll when you go through bends, but nothing alarming. It just feels like it's really well tuned to the road. The steering feels a little bit better than before as well. There still isn't an awful amount of feedback. You can't really feel how much grip you have at the front end, but it's faster, it's much more direct. My experience of the previous F-Type was that you tended to need little micro adjustments mid-corner. With this, it seems to go through the bend just in one motion. It's nice and smooth and flows a little bit more predictably than before. If there's one weak point in this car, I'd say it's definitely the brakes. There's been a couple of times in my drive today when I've had to go for a little cool down lap, shall we say, to avoid the prospect of, fire. But Jaguar do offer the option of carbon ceramics. Tick that box. Ultimately, with all of these little tweaks to the steering, the suspension, the chassis, what you get is a car that feels supremely well balanced. It's a car that feels like all the individual bits are in perfect harmony. There's not one component that seems to dominate the overall experience. I mean, apart from the gearbox is phenomenal. But everything is just beautifully balanced. It feels like the F-Type's been around for a while now and they've chiseled away at it. They've cherry-picked all the elements that they love and fine-tuned it and honed it to a point where it's kind of approaching perfection. It has some stiff competition, of course, but the F-Type stands proud as a wonderful sports car. Beautiful, fast, and most importantly, very involving to drive. Improving this modern classic was always going to be an uphill struggle, but in this, Jaguar's definitely onto yet another winner.